Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central. With the off season upon us, I thought, what better time than to have some guests on to talk about the season, the Bulls' future. And so I'm joined with me today by a very special guest who has been covering the Bulls for over 4 decades now. We like to call him a Bulls historian, author, New York Times bestseller, The Jordan Rules. And you know him for his great work over at Bulls.com. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show, Sam Smith of Bulls.com. Sam, how are we doing? Appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, thanks. All good. Everything's fine. Waiting for that lottery.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, I was gonna, do you have
maybe
any
not. Anyway, something to
Do you
say.
have any vacation plans, now that the off season is hit?
No, just hoping people with podcasts call me so I have something to do. No, I'll
Well, I'm
I'll
glad you
figure
made
I'll
time
figure it
time
out.
for myself.
Yeah.
So Sam, it was an interesting off season for the Bulls. Well, I should say interesting probably isn't the right word for it.
Yes,
Somewhat
definitely not.
uneventful given the Bulls missed the playoffs for the second straight season. Won 39 games, one less than last season. I had actually reached out to you midway through the season to see if you wanted to come on and talk about this team. Well, let's hold off. I don't want to make any sweeping conclusions. Let's wait until the season is over. Now that it's over, I'd love to hear what your conclusions are about the season and the current state of the team.
It was a really disappointing season. I
Yeah,
think it was a poor season. Um, you mentioned the free agency didn't work out. And they really didn't address the issues they had. They needed
right,
shooting. They didn't address shooting. They needed size. They didn't address size. I thought Billy Donovan did what he could with what he had, injuries and all that. But I don't like that excuse because every team has injuries. There was a
right.
lot of guys who are out. I mean, the Clippers guys, they played a little bit more this year. Embiid missed 2 months and Julius Randle missed, half the season. And so, the Bulls knew about Lonzo Ball 2 years ago. So you
Right.
can't keep using that excuse.
Right.
LaVine went out, Patrick Williams went out, and uh, it gave Kobe White an opportunity that he probably wouldn't have had otherwise. So it's sort of offset thing, next man up, and that kind of worked. But um, and just not getting to the playoffs in an Eastern Conference, which really wasn't loaded, has to be a disappointing season. I thought they should have been better. And not just because I picked them to win more games, but at least they did. I did advise take the over, and they were over at least on the betting. So I think that was 37. So they got 39. I mean, not that we thought it was going to be great. I mean, I think I picked 43 wins, maybe 40, something like that. A couple over 500. But that's and they'll say, okay, we started 5-14, and since then we were five over, but you've started 5-14. Whose
Yeah,
whose
yeah,
fault is that?
yeah,
So, and look, I don't have to say it. The GM came up at the end of the season and said it didn't work. We have to change. So that's enough. That's enough acknowledgement there that continuity is at its end. Now,
yeah.
that said,
Actually, that
I'm
was
not sure where you go from there.
yeah. I think that's one thing that did surprise me about AK in his end of season press conference was that he finally admitted that this roster doesn't work, right? That you can't keep running it back with his crew and expecting different results, saying that, he recognizes when it's time for change and that time is now. Before, when we were always hearing from AK, it was really just sort of the same lip service, right? As far as building continuity, not acknowledging that this roster has hit its ceiling. So I was surprised on my part and pleased to see that there was some level of accountability and also a commitment to change. That said, though, words are one thing, action is another. And when I look at this roster, their cap sheet, draft assets, I have a hard time seeing where they're going to be able to implement meaningful change, especially when they also talked about the desire to keep DeMar, keep Patrick. With all the other committed salary on their books, some of them going to be hard to move contracts. I have a hard time seeing what change is actually going to look like. You're much more in tune with what's going on behind the scenes. You've been covering the game for a long time. Is there something I'm missing here? Do you think there will actually be concrete changes going into the summer?
Well, let me say first, I wasn't surprised that he said what he said. In any language, we know the cliche is three times a charm, four times is not, even in Serbian or Montenegrin or wherever he's from. So,
Right.
so I think it's pretty gut, and to his not to his credit, but I understand what he was doing. He came from a Denver where I think one year they missed the playoffs and they had a play-in game, not a play-in game, but it was before the play-in, and they had us, right at the end and in the last day of the season, they didn't make the playoffs with like a pretty good record, 46, 48. I don't remember how many wins it was.
Yeah.
And they didn't do anything. So he came from a place where, the ethic was, let's not panic, let's keep it together. And, we're close, we can make it worse. And so, I think I understand that, and I kind of, endorse that. I think, a lot of teams fire coaches, try to make trades, whatever.
Right.
So, I understood that. But at that point, I'm sure, everyone around him said, look, and the interesting thing was back in August, I think was really, the seminal point, because Vucevic said he was overseas playing in the World Cup
World Cup.
qualifying, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he said publicly, he said, look, if we don't do it this season, that's the end for this
That's
group.
it. Yeah.
So one of his, his first big piece, one of his principal players went on the record early on and said, look, this is the last time for this group. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't work this time, it's not going to work. You got to do something. So
Right.
that was signal enough. Now, that said, to your point, I agree. And I think the whole offseason focuses around DeMar DeRozan. That if they bring back DeMar DeRozan, and which they've said they want to, or they would, or they could, that doesn't really mean anything now.
Right.
DeRozan hasn't said, he said, but none of that means anything. Things change. But that said, if they bring back DeRozan, I don't think they have moves to make. Change is not just trading Zach LaVine, and that's what they obviously want to do. And who knows? I think they're holding out. Well, maybe Cleveland will lose, and they'll want to trade Donovan Mitchell, and New Orleans got swept, so maybe Brandon Ingram. And so Trae Young, whatever. Maybe the owner likes Trae Young, and they'll want to trade DeJounte. So who knows? I think they're sort of holding on in this fantasy sort of thing that goes on right after, as the playoffs, as teams get eliminated. That somebody would want Zach. And that said, I'm a supporter of Zach LaVine. I like Zach. I think despite the sort of media public view, I think he's been unappreciated here. I think he's a huge talent and hasn't always been used correctly. But that said, it seems obvious from both sides that it's time for a change. But it's hard to see, given the circumstances now, that there'll be a big return. And if there is,
Right.
and like I kind of threw out that Mitchell thing a month ago and said, hey, Cleveland doesn't attract free agents. That Zach's got 3 years, and maybe that makes sense for him. And you never know what a team wants to do. I mean, look, the irony of this is the Bulls, two of the biggest needs are athleticism and shooting. Zach is their best athlete and their best shooter, and they want to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. There's other issues behind the scene, that said, but I think there will be other teams that have interest. So, we'll see that. But still, that said, unless they can recoup something of substance that that fits the needs, shooting, size, athleticism, if they re-up DeMar for 2 more years, you're exactly right. There is no other change really to make, because they'll get a draft pick. They're hoping to get into the top 4. They have a salary cap exception, so you can get a decent player. You have 10, 12 million, whatever it is, but that's adding around the fringes. And so the next question, you didn't ask it yet, but if we're me, I would not bring back DeRozan. I think it would be a mistake. Now, I like DeRozan a lot. He's obviously he's a good player, but selfish standpoint from the media, he's the best guy in that locker room.
Yeah.
He's the one guy, no matter what happens, and it's basically a good group of players. He's the one guy, no matter what, that you could always go to, that he always has an articulate, thoughtful response. He once said a couple of months ago, I don't remember exactly what the circumstances was, but reporters were asking him questions, and he said, look, I'll never say no. I hardly ever heard that from, that's kind of Magic Johnson stuff, where a player says, no matter what happens, I'll never not be available for an interview. From
No,
a
I
self
mean,
from a selfish standpoint, I'd hate to see, him out of the Bulls locker room. But to me, if you watch the playoffs and what we're seeing, Curry's out, Durant,
yeah,
LeBron, what we're seeing. So who's having success in the playoffs? Teams with youth, teams with shooting, teams with athleticism, and teams with size.
right.
Orlando, Indiana, Minnesota,
So, yeah.
Oklahoma City. So you gotta change the profile of what your team is if you want to compete in this NBA. That this NBA is evolving. And I don't like it. I don't particularly enjoy watching it as much as I used to. This 3-point transition size game, and I just don't think you have a roster to do that. And if you bring back DeMar, I don't see how you can get that kind of roster.
So if they were to not bring back DeMar, then you think that it would be a better idea to continue to try and make this thing work out with Zach LaVine, or from your perspective, it's like you might as well not bring back DeMar, still focus on trading Zach, because obviously I know that's a focal point of the organization, right? Is to figure out how they go about moving on from Zach LaVine. But if they were to not bring DeMar, what does that then mean for Zach LaVine's future?
Well, I think Zach's going to be traded no matter
Yeah,
what. So, that I'm already sort of counting him out to the door. I was just saying that I think more of him than most do.
sure.
But I think it's pretty clear from the signals from both sides, that a divorce is imminent, and like it would a couple, and it's a no fault divorce.
Yeah,
It's not working out, so that's okay. I think you take a step back. You're not as good a team in next season if you don't have DeMar DeRozan. He's your
right.
leading scorer. He's your best fourth quarter player. He's your most clutch player. All that kind of stuff. My point is that at some point you got to kind of rip the band-aid off.
Right.
Leave that band-aid on, because it's not going to hurt. Once you rip it off, it's going to hurt, and you're going to say, "Oh, I wish I didn't rip that band-aid off."
Right.
But it's going to start healing, and that's the point with the Bulls. You may have to take a step back to kind of start to catch up with where the NBA is going now.
Yeah.
You do have sort of a core of young players who are not so young. Kobe White, Patrick Williams, Ayo DeSumo. Not that they're like a big three, and I think that's the other thing. There is no more big three. I think the Phoenix thing finally blew it up. The
Right.
Bradley Beal thing was a disaster, and I think teams are now decided that it's a two. You have two good guys, and you
Yeah.
have a lot of role players, almost like not like the Knicks with Jalen Brunson is like a one guy. And you have
Right. Right.
role players. But the point is, you don't need these three $50 million guys anymore. And I think so that helps where the Bulls are going. So, supposedly buy that all the time. This is a bad draft, next a good draft. I think there's always guys to get, but next year is supposedly a good draft.
Right.
There's some big guy going to Duke, and all of a sudden, so I'm not a blow it up. I don't believe in that. Go back to the beginning, but I wouldn't mind taking a step back where you could be, relatively competitive, still sort of be, a non-playoff team next year. Then and see that's the thing. Then Lonzo comes off the books. Zach is off the books. DeMar is off the books. Now, you have some money and you have some draft picks and you have some possibilities to sort of fill out. I would pursue something along those lines. I don't think the organization wants to take that step back.
Well, speaking of Lonzo Ball, I mean, does he come off the books? So let's actually talk about Lonzo for a second, because like Zach LaVine potentially moving him, that's an avenue for the Bulls to enact change to this roster, right? Lonzo Ball and his status kind of plays a big role in this. For those that don't know, they're watching. Lonzo's $21 million salary for this upcoming season could come off the books if this injury is deemed career ending. Lonzo will still get paid, but it won't count towards the Bulls cap sheet. The problem is the Bulls likely won't know whether Lonzo will actually be able to play going into next season come July 1st, right? I mean, when free agency opens. So I guess kind of a two-part question. What's the latest you're hearing on Lonzo Ball's status and his potential return? And if the Bulls are actually able to take off that contract off his books, how does that open up opportunities for them to restructure the roster?
Yeah, I think as a fantasy to think that money's going to come off the books. So I don't even consider
Oh,
that
so
a
you meant like the following season, his
yeah,
contract
yeah.
would, I
Summer of
see what you're saying. Got it.
25 it's coming off the books. It's not coming off the books now. He's already said, and his father said, he plans to come back and play. Once you say that, that's over. The only way that the money can come off is if you declare I'm retiring. I can't play anymore. Then the league will send in a doctor, make sure that whatever. But he's saying the opposite, that I'm going to play. So that's not even a discussion to me. That's over with. You
Well,
know,
isn't there a scenario in which that he might say that, oh, I'm ready to play, but he just simply cannot play, and then the Bulls try to, I don't know all the behind the
yeah, but
scenes and everything
he's
from
going
that.
to try to play. So that
Okay,
makes it moot. Once he wants to play, you can't take the money that won't come off.
right, right.
That,
No, I understand that.
but
Yeah,
but it is possible to move his salary at some, depending on the circumstances, because it's under insurance, and
right,
so some team that maybe wants to save the money, Charlotte, who no, whether where they can't sell tickets, no one's in the arena, maybe and he wants to play with his brother,
right,
maybe you can offload him to Charlotte. He's saying, okay, now I'm going to be able to come back play with my brother next year, whatever, later in the season. But meanwhile, Charlotte's saving, $18 million because insurance is paying like 90% of it or whatever it is. It's
right.
a high percentage. So, something like that is possible. I don't expect him to play for the Bulls next season. I don't see how, after sitting out almost 3 years and going through multiple knee surgeries, one of which is experimental that no one's ever had, that he's going to come back and be able to be a contributor. Yeah, that's like a medical miracle. So
Yeah,
I would not count on that. If I were a Bulls fan, I would dismiss. What I would be looking at is after next season, his whether you got him or not, his money's gone.
right.
So that's 20 million off. Now you can do something if like you haven't committed to DeMar for more than a year. Like if DeMar took a year, yeah, I might do that.
Sure.
Might come back for 1 year. Give him $30 million or whatever. It's not a lot to us, but maybe it's significant to him.
Right.
Um,
What what's
but
actually
but I don't
going
know if
back?
I don't know if he wants to do that. I think there's a real good sign and trade opportunity with DeMar. I think there are teams that'll look at him and say, "Wow, we're pretty close, and we had a guy like that who can finish games like that."
Right.
And then maybe the Bulls can recoup two or three things that make sense, and then then you're adding to your roster, and you're addressing some of your big needs
Right.
uh, that I don't think you address immediately. Seems to me if DeMar comes back, you're kind of running in place.
Yeah, that's kind of my perspective, right? And I wanted to touch on that because what I wanted to get sort of your perspective and what's the latest you're hearing on potential negotiations with DeMar. I think it was KC who said a couple weeks ago there were talks of the Bulls offering him a deal upwards of $40 million on a 2-year deal, but DeMar's camp is looking for something more long term, which I think
As far as I
kind of
know,
scares a lot of Bulls fans. I
there's
assume
nothing going on.
negotiations are still ongoing, but what's sort of the latest that you're hearing?
No, I don't think there's anything going on.
Okay,
Uh, yeah, uh, I think I think the Bulls are still in a situation where they're trying to figure out what they want to do,
yeah.
and that's what
Oh,
they should be doing. I
right,
mean, I think there was you know legitimacy to. I don't know how it was portrayed. It might have been something like, we're interested in offering you this. Are you interested in that kind of thing? But I don't see how it would be responsible at this point before you know anything that you would sort of lock in somebody,
yeah,
before you see what's available, what are possibilities, what you're going to do. And so, everything, every indication that I've heard is the Bulls, are waiting to see how some of these playoffs go, as every
yeah,
team is, see who comes, who's on the market all of a sudden, because what happens is guys all of a sudden become available that you never thought, whoa, that guy, we can get that guy.
yeah.
So that's where I think it is, and that's where it should be. You're not in a position now, nor you should be, to say this is our team for next year. I
Right.
think especially because he said, we need to make changes and this group hasn't worked. I think, he's looking at it like there could be a lot of moving parts here, and we got to figure out, how to assemble a team.
So do you think the biggest moving part really for this summer, when talking about change and wanting to see change, it's going to be Zach LaVine getting traded? Whether it's, getting pennies on the dollar or not, that's going to be the move.
Yes, yeah, I think that's the first priority because I think it's also uh, take away, well, what Zach does, what he doesn't, what are the circumstances are. And that said, Zach is a good guy,
Yeah.
popular teammate, doesn't cause problems, but the money is an issue.
Yeah.
It's 130 some million, but 3 more years, 45, however, and so I think they want to, get some cap flexibility possibilities. And so, I don't see them, if they move Zach, I think the priority would be to bring back something expiring deal,
Right.
short term, unless it's, some sort of coup, that's, some foundational piece, something that starts to give them flexibility.
Correct
But
me if
yeah,
I'm wrong.
I think that's the priority.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong on this one because it's my understanding that at least in an off-season trade, they're actually able to take in a lot less in return as long as the team that they're trading with, has cap space, so they absorb, Zach's contract through cap space. To me, I'm looking at a team like Philly, who right now is looking like they're about to go. Wow, there's a 3-point game with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter against the Knicks, so they might be going home. I look at a team like the Sixers who are going to be fleshed with cap space. They have some picks. I don't know. Do you think that that would be a potential option, a destination, depending on how things sort of transpire with the Sixers?
Look, you never know what a team is interested in doing, and what they want. Um, I don't I don't think so. Like, you have to look at it. So, and that said, like I said, I like Zach. But say you're the Sixers and you
Yeah,
have all the cap room. Is that the one guy you're going to invest in? You
sure,
think that takes
sure,
you over the top and makes you a championship team?
right. No, it's fair.
Especially with Embiid, who gets hurt all the time, and you really need some support for him on some level.
And they also got to pay Maxi too.
Right. So it doesn't, that one doesn't seem, that's why I was thinking about Cleveland because,
Yeah,
if although the one thing I heard is I did hear Mitchell wants to go to Brooklyn.
right.
So that might be, Ben Simmons, flip Ben Simmons, who knows what. Um, but the notion that, and that's what I look at, say Cleveland, say Mitchell comes and tells, he got an opt out after next season. Say they lose, and I don't know what the score is. I see, yeah, it's close.
Yeah, it's
Um,
close.
and say Cleveland goes out in the first round, they got to make some changes. That would
Yeah,
be a disaster for them. He says, "Look, I'm leaving at the end of the season." They say, "Okay, for us to get free agents who wants to live in Cleveland other than LeBron, Zach could make a lot of sense. 3 years,
yeah.
he got guaranteed 3 years, high talented. And frankly, to me, he fits better with Garland and Mitchell. Mitchell's too much of a ball hog to me, dribbles around,
Right.
low shooting percentage. I think Zach and Darius Garland would work well. So I could see, something like that. And then you get Mitchell for 1 year and you can see if it works for you. Let him go. You get off the money, make a sign and trade. Who knows what? There's different possibilities. So
Well,
that makes more sense to me. But GMs, there's not a lot of very good, bright GMs. So they do stupid things mostly. So it's hard, you know. So if you know what's going on, it's hard to figure out what GMs are going to do because most of them are not very bright. So you know, it's hard to say, oh, they should do this because invariably most of them do the wrong thing.
well, so then Sam, if you were the GM, what would you do? I'm curious now.
Of what team?
Of the Bulls.
I would move on from DeMar. I
Okay.
would I would do a sign and trade. I don't want to get rid of them. I'm just looking at my roster and say
Yeah,
that doesn't
no,
that
totally
doesn't
get it.
match
Totally
up.
get it.
That's why we got swept by Orlando, and got blown out 4 games. Not blown out every game, but we were in the match for Orlando because of their size, their
Yeah.
athleticism, and they weren't a great 3-point shooting team. But you saw all season long these teams come in, like Miami when they beat Boston the other day, 20 some threes.
Right.
The Bulls, you got to change that.
Yeah.
And DeMar, that's it. As great as he is, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame and deservedly so. He doesn't shoot threes.
Right.
Vucevic was a poor 3-point shooter this year.
Right.
You know, you just gotta fix that. And whether you like it or not, and I'm more an advocate mid-range game, and I think that there's more beauty and more professionalism and a lot of that, but you got to go along with the fan. In a lot of cases, teams are shooting 40, 50 threes against you, and so many of these Bulls losses we see just came down to the team made more threes. They said, well, we shouldn't have lost to Houston. We shouldn't have lost to this team, that team. Well, they made, 25, or Detroit. They made 25
Yeah.
threes or
And the Bulls
23.
went what, 2 for 29 in one of those games?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, that's why, I couch it. When I say about DeMar, I'm not as a negative
Yeah, yeah.
because I say get rid of him. What I'm saying is, he got the Bulls to where they needed to go. They were not respectable before he came.
Right.
He brought them to respectability. Now you need to how do you make a jump from there? And get in line with the teams that are competing in the NBA. And I think the way you do that is you work out a sign and trade with him because he's got value. You work out the thing with Zach, however you sort of do it. You got Lonzo coming off the books in another year. And then, a year from now, this is not the last season in the league coming up. I'm not for, like I said, I'm not for giving up 4 seasons like they did in 2017 and going through that.
Right.
But give if you sort of make some move eye toward the future at one season, I think at some point you got to do that, or else you're going to end up in this for the play-in every year.
I actually wanted to ask you about Billy Donovan. You mentioned him earlier, and kind of, he did what he could with, the current roster at hand and given all the injuries and everything like that. I had you on a while back. It was actually before the start of the 22-23 season. You had asked then, or sorry, I asked you then, hey, if the Bulls come out flat and they disappoint, falling below expectations, will Billy be on the hot seat as far as keeping his job? That was back before the 22-23 season. And you answered saying, I don't think Billy's going anywhere. In fact, they're probably working on an extension with him right now. Sure enough, weeks later, the beginning of that season, we got the news, that secret extension that Billy Donovan, wasn't shared right away. But here we are now, 2 seasons gone by. Bulls finished below 500 in both those seasons, missed the playoffs. So I'm going to ask the question a little bit differently, because I think the front office commitment to Billy is there. We heard that much from AK in his press conference. But if the Bulls in this upcoming season, whatever the rosters they roll out, if they disappoint again, they miss the playoffs, say they even regress further, is Billy Donovan going to even want to come back at that point, right? Because he left OKC because he wasn't interested in going through a rebuild. Although, ironically enough, now OKC is at the top of the Western Conference. But
Right.
what's sort of like? Do you think Billy would even want to come back at that point?
Well, the Kentucky job's filled now, right?
Right.
Uh, no, just joking. Yeah, no, yeah, I don't know. He doesn't confide in me, but I expect that he likes where he is. He has a lot of authority. He gets to coach the team the way he wants. I think he would like to see the roster, fixed up some. I think you can see already he's making some changes in his coaching staff. So that kind of suggests that he's going to locking in for another run. With coaching staff changes, roster changes coming. Um, Billy is not, he's not Phil Jackson and Pat Riley. He's basketball savant kind of guy, but he's a credible coach, and that's
Yeah.
what the team needed at that point, and I think that's what they still need. Somebody who's solid, grounded. Um, he's good with young players. I think he struggles sometimes with veterans. And that's why, I think the Bulls have gotten sort of really good veterans. I think he's more comfortable coaching the young players. You've seen, improvement, Kobe White, Io, hopefully Patrick Williams once he comes back. But I think, he's proven sort of a solid figure among a lot of uncertainty around the team. And so what I usually ask is, okay, you say, you want Billy Donovan. Who is it exactly you want? Darvin Ham or all these guys who were just about to be fired, Frank Vogel. You
Right.
know, it's not some sort of, Bernie Bickerstaff. What is, you know, so I think Billy likes where he is. I think the Bulls very much like having him. Apart from what Artura said, because look, the GMs all lie in these things. They're not going to tell you the truth. I mean, you got to say, oh well, he said, and then the guy says, well, I remember there's a famous. I used to cover boxing, and Bob Arum was one of my favorites. Him and Don King were the top promoters. And so he had a press conference it was before the fight, and he said something. And then the boxing, there would be different press conferences every day leading up to and you famous boxing press conferences where they yell at each other. It was on histrionics. So anyway, Aaron had made some declaration, and the next day, he made the opposite. And then somebody got up and said, well, Bob, yesterday you said this, now you said this. And he said, yesterday I was lying. Today I'm telling the truth. That's something always to remember in sports, that, whatever happened yesterday, they can change the next day. And so, because they don't necessarily owe you any explanation. And
So,
so, but that said, I do believe management, and especially ownership, is comfortable and committed to Billy. And frankly, since I mentioned it once, I expect he will get it within the next 2 years.
wow. Okay. I mean, much to Bulls fans' displeasure. I know Billy gets a lot of criticism from Bulls fans. Even I myself have at times. I
Why?
think,
Why does he? I mean, I'm not on social media. I don't see that kind of stuff.
you know, I
What are they upset about?
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you look around the team and you're like, well, okay, well, who do we blame? Right. And so it's like, yeah, I think from a lot of fans' perspective, and it's probably an uneducated one, because even I myself, sure, there are times where I get frustrated with what I see on the court, right? And sometimes you can kind of put that on the coach, but at the end of the day, I know that the roster construction is flawed. I would think for a lot of fans, it's more of, well, we have this talent, right? You look at Zach, Vucevic, and DeMar, right? These are three very talented, capable players. Why can this not work? And so the immediate thing you look to is the coach. And in my view, that's not always the proper way to look at it, but I think that's probably why. Um, yeah, that's sort of my perspective.
Well,
And
I
I think
noticed that Kevin Durant, um, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal just failed spectacularly,
right.
and they're pretty much better than those three.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, um, I mean, yeah, and you're right. You're right. I mean, the roster is an issue, but sometimes you say, okay, well, I'd rather see Billy, play somebody taller than him at power forward, but he doesn't have one.
Yeah. You don't
So
have options.
what's
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
do? And DeMar's, I don't think he wants to run everything through DeMar like he does.
Yeah.
But that said, he's he's the most reliable guy he's got.
Especially in the fourth
So
quarter. Yeah.
if he's going to run everything through DeMar's going to dribble in. He's going to look for his spot. He's going to pump fake. And so stuff slows down. And
Right.
so if you're going to run a lot of stuff through DeMar DeRozan, to try to win games, which he's trying to do, and winning a lot of games because of DeMar, you're going to
Yeah.
have a lot of stagnant play. And so,
Yeah.
you know, what what else can he do? I mean, the only thing I would do differently than he hasn't done, and I think the fans would be more critical of that, because it seems like of all the players they like to criticize, it's Vucevic.
Right.
I would play Vucevic like Denver plays Jokic.
Jokic.
He's
Yeah.
not as good, you know, but he can do all of those things a little bit, sort of like Jokic like. He can shoot a little bit, he can pass a little bit, he can handle a little bit. But everyone says, well, why is Vucevic outside shooting threes? Well, because DeMar's in the lane shooting too. You can't run him. And the Bulls run. Billy likes pick and rolls. I think they run the most pick and rolls in the league. So if you're going to do that, Vucevic to be squeezed out of the
Yeah.
lane. So
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just
those
clogging
are
up the
the
paint
players.
at that
Those
point.
are the players you got. He's maximized. They always say a coach needs to maximize the talents he's got. Put those talents in position to succeed. He's done that with DeMar.
Yeah.
He's put DeMar in a position to be better than. I mean, certainly was better than the 3 years he was in San Antonio with Popovich,
Yeah.
who's one of the great coaches of all time. And
Right.
so, he's making all NBA's, All Star, in the running for all these awards. But that said, it doesn't exactly match up with the Bulls' future, and now he's 35.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Vucevic and running him as sort of like an offensive hub like Jokic. I mean, they talked about that at media day, right? At the beginning of the season. And I don't know where that kind of went. In a way, it kind of, at least for me anyway, I don't know about other Bulls fans, but it gave me hope like, yeah, that makes sense. I could see that potentially working out. Maybe they should try that and see what it looks like. And it just never really came to fruition. I mean, it was more than just Vucevic saying that. You heard it from Billy Donovan and other players as well. So was there a reason why they didn't try to go that sort of route?
It wasn't something that the coach is comfortable with. It's not the
Yeah.
offense he runs, and
Right.
I think they talked about it and said, and sort of theoretically and said, well, this makes sense, like you're saying, like I'm saying, but then practically, like we need a year to figure this out, to work, to get everybody doing it, and all of a sudden we're 5-14, and we can't experiment anymore. We got to win some games,
Right.
because we're losing the season. So I think on one level, probably the bad start, and I think they did try to do some of that early on,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they probably panicked a little bit, saying, "Holy crap!"
Yeah.
We're getting all here. And so and that's natural. People go back to what works for them.
Yeah.
And, that's worked better, for the Bulls and for Billy and for DeMar, and Zach, personally, DeMar, DeMar plays better when he's got, control of the ball, when he's got his spot, when he can do that. Zach has ball control. And then the other thing is, I think they were trying to do some of that. And then Kobe, if you remember back in the first month of the season, couldn't make a shot. I mean,
Yeah.
he was
He
shooting like
struggled big time.
20%.
Same with Patrick Williams.
Yeah, he was awful. I mean, he was just awful.
Yeah.
And so I think they kind of panicked and not panicked, but they said, we got to get the ball back in DeMar's hands here because
Right.
this is not working. So
Right.
I understand it, and look, Billy's coached a certain way and had a lot of success for a lot of years. Transitioning to that so quickly,
Yeah.
I think would have been very difficult. That said, I like the idea of it, and I think Vucevic did too. I think, he's a very professional, very, not a stir the pot kind of guy. I
Yeah.
think he was disappointed they didn't try that more.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, you can kind of see it even like in Vucevic's demeanor and body language on the court, frustration and maybe not utilizing him in the way that he wanted. So Sam, I'll get you out of here on this so that way, because I'm sure you're eager to watch the end of these games. It's gonna make for an interesting offseason, regardless of the direction the Bulls take. If you had to predict, how do you think the offseason is going to go down? I know some of it you talked about, and I know it's way too early and subject to change and so many different things that could happen throughout the summer, but where do you see this Bulls team and how they perform going into next season and even beyond?
I actually think it'll be similar. I think that Zach will be, gone.
Okay.
Um, and I like you. I just don't see. It certainly sounds like tomorrow will be back. I
Yeah.
believe. I have heard that that offer out there, that they're willing to do that, 2 years at pretty big money. So if I'm DeMar, I take that.
Right.
And then I want to finish in LA. If that's what he wants to do. He keeps himself in good shape. I don't see why he couldn't do that in 2 years. Um, and so if he's willing to take that, and they're willing to give it, and I think they'll try to, they'll obviously the free agent thing didn't work out last summer. They might try to move for one of those guys, find the shooter, and then I think they'll come back and say, look, we weren't that far away. We swept Dakota. We beat, I don't know who else had some, they obviously had good win. Everybody has good wins and bad losses. If we
Right.
hadn't started 5-14, we were 5 over. Now we tweak this and tweak that. So I really don't think I don't like you. The DeMar is the fulcrum to me, and I
Yeah.
expect him to be back. And if he's back, I don't think they're capable of making a lot of change. But they get a first round draft pick, they get another player in free agency, with an exception. Say you get like a Max Strus kind of shooter, kind of thing. And so they say, okay, we've addressed a couple of needs, and I think they move Caruso back to the backcourt. Patrick Williams probably goes back to power forward if they can't find someone else. And at least they're a little bigger, and a little more athletic.
So you think Pat's coming back then too?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think coming off injury like he is, missing,
Yeah.
there's no value. You can't trade a
Yeah.
guy, and that's the issue with that's the issue they're going to face with Zach, and I think that's the other side of it. Like say, I threw out there Cleveland, and which say okay, it makes sense. But say you're the GM of Cleveland or New Orleans or whatever, and they say, well, we got Zach LaVine, and he shows up at camp. He hasn't played since last January, whatever it is, coming off surgery. And say he shows up at camp, he's had multiple surgeries and he can't play.
Right.
How do you tell your GM, I just invested $135 million in this guy, but he can't play?
Right.
So, that's the other thing hanging over that Zach LaVine thing. Yeah, I expect him to move him. I think they'll move him, but you got to persuade somebody that he's going to show up able to play. I've seen him. I think he looks okay, walks fine. It's not
Right.
like Lonzo is literally they were trying to relearn to walk.
Right.
His surgery didn't seem major. Of course, the major minor is major on me, minor on you, but but still, you got to be a GM's that got confidence, and that's why we generally think the package won't be much
Right.
because somebody's taking a big risk to say, because if you do that, you take on a guy and he can't play, and you lose your job. You got to
Do
look
you,
for a new job.
do you think they'll ultimately have to attach, some kind of asset to
They
be
might
able to
have
get off
to.
tomorrow
Yeah,
or
depends
not
on which
tomorrow, Zach?
team. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that I know that's come up in their discussions that we might
Right.
have to throw in Caruso. We might have to throw in
Right. A
Williams.
pick or
One of
something.
them. We have to throw in our pit. So yeah, I think they're trying not to, obviously, but I think that's will be in play. Not necessarily that they'll do it, but I think it'll come up in the discussions that a team will say, "Well, we'll take that, but then you got to give us this."
Right.
And then they got to make the decision. That's why I say there's no way of knowing,
Yeah.
what they're thinking, where they're heading. There's so many possibilities still to come, which is great because I could spend 2 months, making up speculation and, throwing out crazy stuff like you will.
That's the greatest part about it,
That is the
talking
best
about
thing about the
basketball.
NBA. There's no league, and that really attracted me to the NBA at the beginning years ago. That
Right.
there's no league like the NBA where players say, football, they don't say anything. It's like war. Baseball guys are kind of, Southerners, a lot of Southerners, they sit in the corner, they don't say anything to you.
Right.
Hockey players, we don't can't understand what they're saying. Basketball is everything is out front. There's no secrets. There's no. That's why I always used to tell people there's no there was no conspiracy about Michael not playing because there's no secrets in the NBA.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
knows everything all the time.
Right.
It's basically a lot of people hanging out, by the old days in the hanging out the wash and talking. They used to call Stan Olbeck the washerwoman,
Right.
because he was such a gossip about what was going on around the league. But that is sort of the great thing about the NBA. All kinds of speculation, and especially even now, with the financial independence, players
Right.
say everything. There's no governor. There's no censor on what these players say, which is great. It's great
Right.
for. So I think that's part of the attraction of the NBA that and especially once the season ends. That's why free agency is so popular. The draft is so
Yeah.
popular because once the season ends, there's so many possibilities come up, and I think the Bulls are going to be in the middle of that.
Yeah. No, for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And we're going to be looking forward to your coverage on Bulls.com as well. But Sam, I always appreciate you taking the time to come on, chat Bulls basketball myself. I think I speak for all of us fans. We really appreciate all the great work that you guys do over at Bulls.com. So best of luck to everything. And hope you get to enjoy the offseason.
Oh yeah, I just thought that. Yeah, I don't want to say any of this stuff, so cancel it. No, it's all right. That's all right. You're okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Sam. We appreciate the time, and thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one.